The Chargers decided to decline former first-round pick Zion Johnson's fifth-year option on Thursday in a move which was not a surprise, but it does shine a light on just how unclear the future is for the Chargers' interior offensive line.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drugmeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 9 seasons together. This is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen today. To make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, Daniel, today the Chargers took literally all day to be able to make a decision that seemed like it was one of the easiest ones of the offseason, but the Chargers ultimately came to the decision to waive the 5th-year option for Zion Johnson. So we're going to talk about that, talk about the fallout from that. Then we're going to get into some early training camp battles. What are the biggest ones that we are going to be paying attention to? And can Quinton Johnston take another leap? Well, I'm going to tell you, there's some fire there that's going to make him have to.
Yeah, absolutely, because Tre Harris is going to be coming for that number 2 wide receiver role potentially and trying to make his way up the depth chart. But this episode is brought to you by Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K. Turn any TV into your Xbox, no console needed. Head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to learn more. Like you said, David, we waited all day to figure out the news. At one point, it had been hours since the last team other than the Chargers had been reported to make a decision on their first-round pick and picking up the 5th-year option. And we knew all along it was going to be almost impossible for the Chargers to pick up Zion Johnson's 5th-year option, which would have cost them $17.5 guaranteed million in 2026, which is a really, really big number. And even though his play has been pretty uneven through his first 3 seasons, he would have had to play so well to be able to kind of have them guarantee that without knowing what he's going to do in 2024, right? Or in 2025, because that's the whole thing. You have to make the decision before he plays this season, and for the Chargers specifically and Zion Johnson, you have to make that decision before you trot him out there potentially at a brand new position. So not a surprise, David, that he didn't get the 5th-year option picked up. But again, it's just now we know for sure, and now kind of the future you have a little bit more clarity on.
Yeah, and then for those of you that are kind of wondering, how do they even figure out how to do the 5th-year option? Well, there's a couple of criteria that they look at. The first is basic, basically where the player who doesn't meet any of the requirements, there's like a number set there. Then they go to 1 Pro Bowl, then multiple Pro Bowls, and then playing time, which is what Zion Johnson qualified for with the 5th-year option, which for him, say what you want about his play on the field, he has been extremely durable and available. He's played in 49 of 51 possible games for the Chargers. So he has absolutely been out there. But yeah, I think this definitely shows that, the Chargers offensive line, there's still some shuffling to be done. I mean, I think you feel really good about the tackles on the outside. And then, of course, you bring in Mekhi Becton to shore up that right guard spot. But besides that, there's a lot of uncertainty that still needs to figure itself out, and we're going to be seeing how that unfolds throughout this offseason.
Yeah, and some of it probably won't, as far as at least what the future is at not just the center position, because that's where they're having to play, but also the left guard position. But at the end of the day, through 3 seasons, Zion Johnson has not lived up to his draft slot, which is kind of unfair to him because to a certain extent, you don't decide where you get drafted, right? The team decides, and just because you're drafted somewhere doesn't mean you're going to get that kind of play. But especially when you play offensive guard specifically, and a team uses a first-round pick on you, you're expected to be an above-average player and maybe even bordering on kind of a top 10 player of the position if you're going to use a premier pick like that on an interior offensive lineman. He hasn't been able to live up to those lofty standards. He started at right guard his first season. Then he ended up switching over to left guard, and last season was his best year. At the same time, it came to the playoff game, and he kind of still crumbled in the same way. And I think the biggest concern for me is, and one of the reasons that made this kind of so much of a kind of a foregone conclusion, is you can still sign him after the season if he balls out. And the chances are he's not going to make $17 million even if he does play great. Because if he was to make $17.5 million, there's only one center that makes that right now, and it's Creed Humphrey. Nobody, like, to make him the second highest paid center in the league, it just wouldn't make any sense. And it wouldn't make any sense at guard either. And it would still make him one of the, top 10 guards in the league. So it just, even if he played well, he would be almost impossible to kind of say, hey, we're going to give this guy $17.5 million guaranteed dollars next year, because all of the offensive linemen are grouped together. So centers aren't differentiated from guards, aren't differentiated from tackles, but it's based on all the money that position makes. So offensive linemen on their 5th-year option are making more than wide receivers at the
Big
base
money.
level out of it.
Yeah.
So it was always going to be really, really hard for him to get it. But I think this also, David, just shines a light kind of, now you don't really have a real plan as far as the future goes at center or left guard in 2026 outside of Branson Taylor, right? That's basically all you have. Your 6th-round pick, and you have to be hopeful that he's ready to take over. But besides that, right now, Jamari Sawyer, Trey Pipkins, Andre James, Zion Johnson, all going to be free agents in 2026. You're only going to have Bozeman, Branson Taylor, and Mekhi Becton in the interior next year. So, like, the future there, you could still go into next year feeling like you have to address both of those needs still, even though you went into this draft with those.
Yeah, I mean, and to the Chargers' credit, I think they did a really good job throughout the offseason of being able to address a lot of needs and really kind of shoring up the depth of the football team. But inevitably, there's always going to be one position that gets neglected because there's just only so many picks and so much money to go around. So as we see it right now, there still is a lot of work to be done on the interior of that offensive line. There's a lot we don't know in the intermediate, in the long term, and in the short term. There's so much that needs to be figured out. And so, yeah, I think that's probably one glaring red area on this football team where you have to be like, man, there's still resources that need to be put into these position groups for, where you want to go, because, hey, the spine of your football team, it's so important. It's that offensive and defensive line, and there's still some weak parts of that spine that need to be reinforced.
And it's interesting because in his time in Baltimore, the Ravens didn't usually take a ton of high draft picks on the interior when Joe Ortiz was there. They were usually finding him in 3rd, 4th, 5th round picks and using those kind of resources. They've only spent 1 pick in 2 drafts now on the interior of the offensive line. And in 2026, you're still going to have that kind of uncertain as far as the future plan there. But it is Fan Mail Friday, and we want to thank all the everydayers for contributing today, including this from Champagne Vinny on Instagram, who says, will the Chargers sign a center or guard soon, David? What do you think?
Yeah, I highly doubt that they're going to sign another center at this point. I mean, they have Bradley Bozeman. They signed Andre James. They're trying to transition Zion Johnson to center. So I think that's definitely not going to happen. I don't think there's, barring an injury, there's any way that they're going to be signing another center. And then, honestly, also for guard, I said it before, I'm not so sure that they're going to bring in anyone at guard, because it's kind of a situation where the battle at center might have a part to play in who plays left guard. I mean, at least right now. And of course, they could go through it and, get through a part of training camp and be like, oh my goodness, red alert, we need to bring somebody else in to fix this position. But I just don't think it's anytime soon.
I totally agree with that part of it. I'm not going to ever write off Joe Ortiz and kind of his willingness to add to the roster at any point of the offseason. And as we've talked about before, turn over every stone to make sure that you're having the most complete roster going into the year. They have the resources to sign guys.
Oh, yeah.
There are guys out there that would be very worth signing compared to the guys they have. I agree with you at center. It's just kind of a body count number, right?
Yeah.
You just have too many guys in that room. They also like Bucky Williams, right, who was the undrafted free agent from last year that they kept around and signed to a futures contract. But a lot of, a couple names people have brought up to us, Brandon Sherff, Will Hernandez, those guys would be most likely big upgrades over what you had. But not just that, they would give you much, much more competition than Bradley Bozeman, who hasn't played guard since 2020, or Trey Pipkins, who's never played left guard, or Andre James, who's never played guard. At the very least, you go add one of those guys who doesn't have a job right now. If that's all it takes, why not do it? But I think, to your point, they might have to see it in training camp. They might have to realize and watch these guys get into pads and unfortunately find out it's a disaster before they decide to make a change there, which is unfortunate because it's like we can see it's kind of a train wreck from a mile away. But it is Fan Mail Friday, and we still have more great fan questions to get into, including a couple early looks at some training camp battles we're going to be keeping our eye on. So we're getting into all that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. Did you know your Fire TV is also an Xbox? Turn any TV into your gaming and entertainment hub with Fire TV Stick 4K devices. No console required. Just grab your peer controller, subscribe or sign into Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play included, and you're ready to play. Dive into hundreds of premium titles from EA Sports College Football 25 to Call of Duty Black Ops 6 and so many more. There are really so many games on Xbox Game Pass Ultimate. I mean, that's pretty much all the games I play on Xbox, but you still also get all the endless entertainment with 4K streaming. Watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscribed services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus, Max, and more. It does all the things that your Fire TV stick has always done. And now it's an Xbox. And now you can take it with you. And now you can sneak it into your bedroom to escape from your baby to play Xbox. And your wife's like, were you playing Xbox? And you're like, no, my Xbox is right there. Don't you know that? How would I do that? The Amazon Fire TV Stick 4K is how you do it. So head to Amazon.com/Fire TV Locked On to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. All right, David, we have more fan mail questions to get into, and thank you to all the everydayers who contributed by hitting us up at Locked On LAC or on Instagram at Locked On Chargers or calling into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. But let's start with this one, David, from John Clark. Always thinking about you, John Clark. Appreciate you always contributing to the show, and hope your fight with cancer right now is still going as good as it possibly can. And you have a great question today. One of Harbaugh and Ortiz's mottos is competitors welcome. It was what they said to every draft pick when they talked to them on the phone after they were drafted.
Yep.
Ortiz and company all have created a lot of competition across many position groups. As the roster stands right now, what are the four most intriguing camp battles, 2 players for 1 spot we should be watching when camp opens? David, for the sake of time and to get to as many questions as we can, we'll go with one on each side of the ball. What are you looking forward to as far as an early look at some camp battles that are going to be brewing here in a little over a couple months?
Yeah. So, I mean, starting on the offensive side, where I think it's probably the biggest camp battle of all, it's who is going to play the center position for the Chargers. And just because they want Zion Johnson to be the guy, I mean, how does it feel to want, right? That's one of the things my mom said to me when I was in the store trying to get a toy to throw into the cart and sneak in. And she says, no, you can't have that. So it's just one of those things. I think that is going to really clear up a lot about what's going on with the interior of the offensive line. So that's definitely the biggest battle for me on offense. And then on defense, I think it's going to be the CB4 position. I think the first 3 corners for the Chargers are all pretty set with Cam Hart, Tarheeb Steele, and Dante Jackson coming in with his 5+ interceptions that he had last year. I think that's going to be your top 3 guys. But after that, it's Benjamin St. Juste. I mean, it's Dean Leonard and then potentially Jasir Taylor, which I think is probably on the outside looking in.
Yeah, Triquez Bridges maybe.
And
gets in on
Triquez
that.
Bridges for sure. I mean, we talked yesterday about his incredible height, weight, speed, length kind of situation there. So I think you'll have every chance to be able to crack the roster, but I think that's going to be a position group on defense I'm going to be paying pretty close attention to.
Yeah, I think the money for Dante Jackson makes it just seem like a little bit of a foregone conclusion that he'll be kind of that other outside corner outside of Cam Hart. Yeah. And Tarheeb still, and then maybe, if you're really only running 2 corners, it's just Still and Hart out on the outside anyways, and you also have Derwin James, who just came off of an all-pro slot cornerback season. So you have options there, but it seems like he's the most other in nickel packages obvious option for the outside cornerback position. I agree with center. Andre James versus Zion Johnson has the potential of determining how good this offensive line is, truthfully, right?
Yep.
And how many, guys are actually changing positions on the interior of that offensive line, which is a big thing too. I'll go a different way on, well, let me say this first about the Andre James, Zion Johnson thing. I still think that Andre James is going to get a chance in play center in that starting spot. I have to think that if you're signing a center, right, you have to still trust that this coaching staff is going to put the best player out there. Maybe not something you could always kind of guarantee in years past with prior regimes, as we've seen Kenneth Murray, just to throw a name out there. you feel differently about this one, right? But defensively, I'll go with Junior Colson and just him. Can he take a firm grasp of the starting role? Because you could argue both Denzel Perryman and Troy Dye both played better than him last year.
Yeah.
Denzel Perryman started the season as a starter, right? Can he take that away? He's going to get every opportunity to do it. They want him to be the future next to Deion Henley. Can he go and just snatch that so it's not even a conversation? I think that's really one of the biggest things for me. But getting back to the center conversation, Jackson says, if a scenario unfolds where Andre James is the starting center for the Chargers, do you trust Zion Johnson or Bradley Bozeman more to start at left guard? What do you think?
Yeah, this is a little bit of an interesting question, but Bradley Bozeman hasn't played guard since 2020. Although, when he did play guard, he was pretty solid there. I mean, he only gave up 6 sacks and 42 pressures and 2,121 snaps. But
is that over a 2-year span?
It's been 5 years since he's played the guard position, so it's just hard to project how he's going to be able to play. Yeah, that's over a 2-year span. Yeah, I didn't include his first year because he barely played at all. Yeah. So just to get, a substantial kind of sample size there, I went with, the 2 kind of full complete years that he played at guard. So pretty solid there, as far as that's concerned, but a long time. He hasn't, been able to set in that position or kind of learn the differences, or not learn the differences, but be able to kind of, practice the differences because he's been solely a guard. And you look at Zion Johnson in his last 2 seasons, he's given up 9 sacks and 66 pressures in just over 2,000 snaps. So, I mean, looking at those numbers, at least, it's Bradley Bozeman that's been the better guard there. But I think I probably would feel better about Zion probably playing left guard here because he's done it more actively and he's done it more, consistently. And, it's been something that, at least I feel like at left guard, he's a little bit better there. But we'll have to see what he does at center. I think that's the big question about how that's going to work out.
Yeah, and he is, when you brought up those Bradley Bozeman numbers, I was like, man, that's a lot of pressures and sacks. But then you say it's over 2 seasons.
Over 2 seasons, yeah.
Very much better than what you've seen from Zion Johnson, who to his credit, like, he probably had his best season last year. And I still think, for me, the group I would trust most is Zion Johnson at left guard, but then having a new center and a new right guard to pair with him. If Zion Johnson's your worst offensive lineman, playing the level he gave you last year, you can work with that.
Yeah, you can cover up 1, right?
You can cover up 1, but you can't cover up 2. Or, definitely couldn't cover up 3. 2 is probably pretty hard as well. So yeah. I think Bradley Bozeman, he did play it. He did play it in Greg Roman's offense in Baltimore. Yep. He can do it. It's not like Andre James was like, yeah, he can do it, and he's never actually done it at the NFL level before.
That's different.
Bradley Bozeman does have it in his history, and he, has done it in Greg Roman's offense. But at the same time, I think I would go with the guy who's done it, more recently, and is still coming off of his best season, just crumbled in the playoffs. But if Zion Johnson goes through all of camp fighting for center and loses, does he just automatically become that left guard? That is the question, right? Yeah. Because you don't know how. It kind of feels like the ship, they don't want him to be the left guard, is what it feels like. At least those were the public statements it felt like. But let's get to this one here from Chris Saiz, who says, do you think the Chargers coaching staff possibly believed that players getting open and making plays was more of a concern than the offensive line, which explains how they've approached the draft and free agency? What do you think?
I think that's absolutely what the case was. I think they showed us that with the resources that they put into both of those position groups. I mean, for the offensive line, they signed Mekhi Becton and Andre James in free agency and brought back Bradley Bozeman. Basically, that was pretty much it. As far as the weapons were concerned, it was a much different situation there. They signed Mike Williams. They signed Tyler Conklin. They signed Najee Harris, and then they drafted Omarion Hampton. They drafted Tre Harris. They drafted, Aronde Gadsden. They drafted KLS. So they put a lot more resources into the weapons than they did on the offensive line. So that shows you directly where their concentration was and how they wanted to use their resources.
And I do think that is a big factor in it. Is it the only factor? No, I'm sure there's multiple things that went into it, and some of it could have to do with who dropped to them in the draft and what their options were there and potential guys in free agency that they pursued that they didn't end up landing. All of that stuff factors into it, but it's a great point brought up here, and I actually saw a great thread about this from MIBPJ on Twitter, who basically put out just a bunch of charts talking about, okay, well, was the Chargers pass protection really bad, or was the Chargers pass protection really bad because they were always stuck in 3rd and long situations? And he really laid it out in a great way that makes it super digestible, but I'll give you kind of the cliff notes here. Part of the reason the Chargers pass protection was so poor is because they were bottom 10 in yards to gain on third down, over 7.25 yards on average is what they had to do to convert third downs, which is just nuts. They also had the third worst early down rush percentage, which means they're running the ball on early downs and they weren't getting anything out of it.
And you felt
it was sticking them behind the chains, which is another big part of it. You know, penalties and all those things factor in as well. But the other part of it that was interesting is the interior of the offensive line for the Chargers ranked 22nd in Pro Football Focus's run blocking grade and 13th in ESPN's run block win rate grade, which is crazy to think that they were above average. And the Chargers running backs actually ranked 29th in rushing grade and 27th in elusiveness. So the two things do go hand in hand. If you can run the ball better, you're going to put yourself in more advantageous positions. And as MIBPJ put it on there, when the Chargers got into third and less than 4 yards, they were actually one of the better teams, or at least above average, at protecting the quarterback. So there is something to it. Man. He's a great follow. Great follow on Twitter. But I thought he broke it down in a way where it's like, hey, if you can get into more advantageous situations on third down, you're going to fix a lot of the protection
Makes a lot of sense to me
that they have. I would still like them to improve it more. Yeah. But we still have more to get into, including if Tre Harris will be wide receiver 2 for the Chargers by the time the season starts, and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. David, we still have more Fan Mail Friday questions to get into, but thank you to all the everydayers again for coming and hanging out with us today and always making us your first listen, and for contributing to today's show. For all of you who hit us up at Locked On LAC, on YouTube, on Instagram at Locked On Chargers, wherever you guys hit us up, and the voicemail line as well at 323-524-7924, like a theer who we're going to get to. But thank you for making us your first listen. If you need a second listen, check out Locked On NFL Scouting. The draft is over, but the roster moves and news never stop, and that's why hosts Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino can help you be the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. Dave, let's switch over to a different part of the offense here, because it is always offense heavy when we let you guys, take the reins here. And we have a good question from a Thier about a wide receiver both of us are really, really excited about. Within reason, I think I love Tre Harris as much, as anyone. He was one of my draft crushes throughout the process. I don't know if I'm willing to go on this one.
Daniel, David, this is a Thier. I have a question. I love Tre Harris' pick. The question is, will he break camp as the wide receiver number 2 behind Ladd or not? Love to hear you. Thank you.
It's such a good question, because talent-wise, it's hard. I think it'll be hard to not give him snaps, right? I really do. But I do think at the same time, you look back to last season, David, Ladd McConkey was a more polished player coming out. He was more ready to go just from the route running perspective, just kind of, especially being able to play in the slot, not having to worry as much about releases and things like that. But Joe Alt and Ladd McConkey were the only players that were starting as rookies from the jump.
Yeah.
And even Ladd, it took a little while for those big games to start kicking in. So I don't know if it's as simple as that, because he probably starts as wide receiver 4, and then we'll have to, leapfrog Quinton Johnston and Mike Williams, I think, to get to that slot.
Yeah, and that's the name right there. I mean, Mike Williams is the wide receiver 2 here, and it's because of the previous production and chemistry that he has with Justin Herbert. They've put together a lot of big moments. They've had there's a established rapport and trust there from Mike Williams and Justin Herbert. So I think Mike Williams is the wide receiver 2 until he is supplanted. So it's going to be up to Tre Harris to leapfrog both Quentin and Mike Williams on the depth chart to be that wide receiver 2. But I don't know if it's going to be as quickly as everybody expects or wants it to be.
Well, because they have legitimate options in front of him. And even if, no matter how you kind of feel about Quinton Johnston, and honestly, I kind of think Quinton Johnston probably goes into camp as wide receiver 2, but the problem is just like they play very different positions, right? You need kind of an X receiver for certain packages, and you want to have a guy like Quinton Johnston out there for others, but like he's the guy that had easily the most productive season out of anyone on this roster, not named Ladd McConkey right now. So to think, like you still have to figure out if Mike still has it, man. Like he's coming off like an 18 catch season. So like, you have to be able to kind of suss that part of it out, but it will be, to your point, the biggest part of it's just going to be how quickly can Tre Harris earn the trust of Justin Herbert, because he is going to go into it with connections to everyone else on the roster, Darius Davis included. along with Quinton Johnston, along with Mike Williams, along with Lab McConkey. That chemistry is already built. You have to be the one to kind of chip in to that, right? And it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of kind of development on his side, and just, release packages and crisping up the route running and things like that, showing the willingness to block to get in on this offense too. But yeah, I think, there's a question of, hey, what will the season end at and what will the season start at are very two different questions.
Yeah.
Could he, rank second or third in receiving yards at the end of the season? Maybe that's something we'll address a little bit further down the road, but I think it might take a little bit longer than that. But I'd be shocked if he didn't have a role even early on, because I just think he's that talented. But let's get to this one from Chris Pepper, who's asking, do you think Quinton Johnston takes another step forward this offseason? David, what do you think here? Because I know you've been a staunch defender of Quinton Johnston, who's always getting all the hate that's out there.
Yeah, he definitely did. He definitely is. People love to hate him, and I mean, I understand a part of it. I understand a part of it, but this is a player that has grown from year one to year two pretty, substantially. I mean, especially when you look at the stats. Does he still have parts of his game he needs to fix and improve on? Of course. We all know what the kryptonite is for Quentin. He's got to shore up those hands. And last year, we saw a pathway for Quentin where there wasn't much resistance. There wasn't a lot of people behind him pushing him. He pretty much was one of those go-to guys out of necessity. It just had to be that way. But also, he was put in bad situations because of that necessity, because there was nobody else to do what they were asking him to do. And so now that's not the case. Obviously, the Chargers drafted Tre Harris. They brought back Mike Williams. They drafted KLS. So now there are people that are going to push him and are going to want to take his snaps from him that have skill sets that definitely should be on the football field, right? So it is now going to be up to Quentin to show that progression, to be able to show more reliability with the hands, but also an opportunity for the Chargers to put him in the position to utilize his skill set the way it should be utilized. Don't send him on these go routes and these long down the field, long developing routes. That's just not his game. That's not what he should be doing. So this is the opportunity for him to respond to the adversity that's going to be there for him with the pressure that these other guys are going to put on him, but also for the Chargers to utilize him in the best way that his skill set says he should be used.
This is the interesting thing here is, like, he might not have as many snaps as he had last season. He might not have as many yards run, routes run as he did last season, because the thing is even though they can use him in a better facet, if you're not using him on the go routes and those, snaps you had him on the field for last year, somebody else is taking those snaps away. So yeah, I think for him, it could be his most efficient season. Like, I don't think he's ever going. At a certain point, you are what you are. Last year, some of the reason for the numbers he put up was because he was the only option and he was out there every time, right? And he got a ton of snaps, and those snaps are going to be challenged a little bit this year. I do think, though, it could be his most efficient season, just as far as a football player, not, him necessarily becoming wide receiver one or putting up 1,000-yard season. But I think he could be the most efficient version of himself, and I think the Chargers not needing to use him in those ways where he needs to beat man-to-man coverage and beat guys down the field one-on-one, it works best for both sides, and it makes you, a better football team, a better offense in this case specifically. But let's get to this one from JM, who says, also, before they get to that, this is the decision the Chargers are going to have to make next year, too, on Quinton Johnston, right? Yeah. He's going into his, third season, which means after this year, they're going to have to decide if they want to pick up his fifth-year option. So this is a huge year for Quinton Johnston. But let's get to this from JM, who says, how much better will our drafted wide receivers and tight ends be with Justin Herbert, who is a far better quarterback than they had in college? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I think with the couple of the guys that they drafted, they didn't have bad quarterbacks. I mean, Tre Harris had Jackson Dart, who just got drafted in the first round, and Rondé Gatson, for example, had Kyle McCord, who led the nation in passing yards, but obviously none of them are Justin Herbert. Like, let's be real and clear about that right now. I think these guys are definitely going to benefit. I think KLS might benefit the most, though. I think this is a guy who, his quarterback play wasn't nearly at the level of the other two.
You can't name him, which tells you everything you need to know about him, because he's not a guy like that.
Yeah, well, they did a couple of quarterback changes, so it was just hard to kind of nail down who exactly his quarterback was. So yeah, I think for that situation, they're all going to be a beneficiary, but those hands better be ready because Justin Herbert can throw some rockets. And if not, and if they don't catch the football, then he's going to go somewhere else. But he's also shown that if you're available, you're out there and you're open, he's going to get you the football.
Absolutely. And I think that with him specifically, like I think back to last year with Brandon Rice and a story that came out of training camp where, I think he might have pulled up on a route a little bit early just because he's like, okay, well, I've already kind of reached the furthest any quarterback can throw the football. So like the ball's obviously not coming to me. And then the ball lands, 10 feet in front of him because he didn't run it out fully. And he's just like, oh my God, like talking to the coaches, like, I didn't know he could get it there. Like, you have to be willing to always, keep it going.
Finish those routes.
Those routes because you anywhere on the field, he could put it on you. So that is, a big difference. But I think the bigger thing for guys like this isn't about who the quarterback is. It's about what the competition staring across from them is. That's the bigger thing. Can you separate from these guys who are all better athletes than pretty much anyone on your team and anyone you played against at the collegiate level for a lot of, these guys. So I think that's what it is. But I do think, what you have with Justin Herbert is you feel like whatever weapon you bring in is going to have the best chance to fulfill their potential. And that's all you can ask for. And I mean, that's why he's given career years to Gerald Everett's and Will Dissly's and Mike Williams and DeAndre Carter's and like anyone basically who's played with him has had their best season with him outside of, one Keenan Allen season with Phillip where he put up, almost 1,400 yards. Outside of that, though, and he probably would have broke those records had he stayed healthy in the last season, and Justin Herbert didn't break a finger on both hands. But I think the other nice thing, though, is these guys can also help Justin Herbert because what the Chargers did get in the weapons they decided to bring in is guys that not just can catch the ball, right? So, there's been a few games in Justin Herbert's career where it's like the difference between the drop passes just in his completion percentage goes from he had a 59% game that would have been a 72% completion game if the Chargers didn't drop 5 balls, right?
That's crazy.
These guys can help him in that regard. And not only that, they have guys that can erase bad throws. Whether it's Tre Harris, whether it's Rondé Gadsden II, whether it's even, KOS, Keandre Lambert-Smith, all these dudes have tough catches on their resume. So,
and they're good against man coverage, right? Which is something the Chargers really, really struggled with. So
yeah, and Quinton Johnston really, really struggled with too. And then obviously Will Dissly was the worst tight end in the league versus man coverage last year. So you have Conklin now, you have Gadsden now, you have a Tre Harris, you have KOS, who just has the speed to take off, and you have to kind of respect it. So I love what they did. I like the weapons they got, and as we talked about, the weapons and the threats you have now between Omarion Hampton and all the other guys that you've added there, it just gives teams more things to have to worry about. But there still are flaws, and we'll see if the Chargers continue to address them throughout the offseason. But that is going to wrap things up for today's show. Make sure you guys are back here next week, and make sure you're following or subscribing on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and having your notifications on and listening wherever you get your podcast from, because we have a super crossover next week, Locked On Chargers and the director. So excited to get him back on. Those shows are always a blast. To make sure you don't miss it, follow us on those places and on all of our social media where we post the show every day at Locked On LAC on Twitter, at Locked On Chargers on Instagram, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. If you guys want to call in like Athir did, call into 323-524-7924 and give us your 30-second Chargers question, or a buy or sell if it's a buy or sell day as well. But thank you guys. I mean, we're in the middle of the offseason right now, and you guys are giving us some of our best weeks that we've ever had, and your continued support and listening to us as we're slogging through the offseason and trying with all of our might to come up with good stuff to talk to you guys about, and how much we stress about that stuff. It just is so nice to see it pay off with you guys and your enjoyment of the show, but also just, a lot easier to do. What is it? I mean, 11 shows in the last 12 days.
Yeah.
You guys make it worth it, and it's a lot of long nights, but the everydayers out there continue to support, and we're going to continue being your team every day. But thank you guys so much. We'll be back to you guys next week when we have the director on. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.